Gary Ridgway, more infamously known as the Green River Killer, confessed to murdering 71 women, but only 49 were ever proven. Picture a man, living in the shadows, whose actions sent tremors of fear across the globe. A man whose eerie confession left us questioning how many victims truly fell prey to his deadly grasp. The chilling tale of Gary Ridgway is shrouded in mystery, a puzzle of horror that we're about to unravel. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the man who made the world shudder. Born on February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ridgway's life was marked by disturbing behavior from a young age. The second of 3 sons, he was raised in a tumultuous household, with a domineering mother and a passive father. As a child, Ridgway struggled with dyslexia, which led to poor performance in school, and consequently, a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy. The young Ridgway developed an unhealthy obsession with sex and violence, often fantasizing about violent sexual acts. His early encounters with sex were marked by a disturbing lack of empathy, a trait that would become chillingly characteristic of his future actions. By his teenage years, Ridgway's behavior had escalated alarmingly. He once confessed to drowning a cat for mere amusement, a classic warning sign of a burgeoning psychopath. These seemingly disconnected incidents, when pieced together, paint a terrifying portrait of a mind shaped by violence and deviance. These early signs were just a glimpse of the horror that was to come. The year 1982 marked the beginning of a reign of terror in King County, Washington. A specter loomed over the community, a phantom soon to be known as the Green River Killer. The first victims were discovered in the summer of that year, their bodies discarded without thought along the banks of the Green River, a grim sign of the horrors yet to come. These victims, mostly young women who were engaged in sex work or had run away from home, were targeted for their vulnerability. Their lives were snuffed out, their dreams unfulfilled, their futures stolen from them. The Green River Killer did not just murder his victims, he obliterated their identities, often leaving their bodies to decompose for so long that identification became a daunting task for the authorities. The method of killing was as chilling as it was consistent. Strangulation was the killer's preferred method, a choice that spoke volumes about his need for control, his desire for dominance. The victims were often left naked, a final act of humiliation that was as cold as it was cruel. As the body count grew, so did the fear. The police, desperate to make headway in the case, formed a special task force dedicated to catching the Green River Killer. They brought in experts, profiled the killer, and even consulted with infamous serial killer Ted Bundy in hopes of gaining insight into this elusive predator. But for all their efforts, the Green River Killer remained a phantom, a ghost that seemed to slip through their fingers at every turn. The task force was disbanded in 1984, but the killings didn't stop. They continued sporadically throughout the 80s and even into the early 90s. Despite the efforts of the police, the Green River Killer remained elusive, continuing his horrifying spree. In 2001, almost 2 decades after the first body was discovered, Ridgway was finally apprehended. The long hunt for the Green River Killer had reached its chilling climax. The breakthrough came when advancements in DNA technology allowed for the reanalysis of evidence collected years earlier. This led to a match with Ridgway's DNA, which had been collected during the initial investigation. The evidence was damning. Not only was Ridgway's DNA found on several victims, but microscopic paint particles from his workplace were also discovered on the clothing of some victims. The walls of his home, once thought safe and secure, were closing in on him. The police arrested Ridgway on November 30, 2001, while he was leaving his job at a truck factory. He was charged with the murders of 7 women whose cases were linked to him through DNA evidence and the paint particles. The confession that followed was as horrifying as it was revealing. Ridgway admitted to killing as many as 71 women, primarily targeting those who were vulnerable and marginalized. His confession laid bare the mind of a predator who viewed his victims not as people, but as objects to satisfy his macabre desires. When it came to his trial, Ridgway struck a plea bargain. In exchange for providing details about more victims and locations of bodies, he would avoid the death penalty. The courtroom was a picture of grim faces as the details of his heinous acts were read out. On December 18, 2003, the final verdict was delivered. Ridgway was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and disgust as the sentence was read out. Ridgway's reign of terror had finally ended, but the scars he left on the community would never fade. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary people and ordinary places. Behind bars, Ridgway continued to haunt the world with his chilling confessions. In the cold isolation of his prison cell, Gary Ridgway, the infamous Green River Killer, began to unravel the sheer magnitude of his horrific acts. Each chilling confession was like a cold wind, blowing through the hearts and minds of those who heard it, leaving them frozen in a moment of sheer terror. He relished in the details, describing each act with a bone-chilling indifference that was almost as horrifying as the crimes themselves. His life in prison was a stark contrast to the freedom he once experienced. The man who once roamed the streets preying on the innocent was now confined to 4 walls, guarded day and night. Yet, even within these confines, Ridgway continued to cast a long and terrifying shadow. The impact of his crimes echoed far beyond the courtroom and the prison walls. The victims' families, forever scarred by the loss of their loved ones, carried an unimaginable burden. The community, once a place of safety and trust, was left in a state of fear and disbelief. The Green River, once seen as a symbol of life and vitality, was forever tainted by the memory of those who had lost their lives. In the aftermath of Ridgway's reign of terror, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of men was left behind. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, will forever be remembered as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history.